everybody. We appreciate you hanging out with us on this Tuesday. He's Derek Gunn. I am Rob Ellis. Barrett may be popping in at some point. We will see what happens, but always thrilled to talk to our next guest. Does an amazing job covering the Eagles for The Athletic. You can follow him on Twitter at ZBerm. That would be Zach Berman. Zach, first off, before we get to the Eagles, man, I know what a Sixers fan you are. I need your take on last night and the beard going bananas.
Yeah, that was an awesome game to watch. I mean, all around, you respect the performance from the team. Obviously, Harden and Doc Rivers, right? I mean, he's gotten a lot of criticism in this market. That was a well-coached game on his part. So very impressed and curious to see what happens these next few days.
Yeah, it's a big advantage they have there. That's for sure, Zach, no doubt. All right, so let's dig into this thing. It was an eventful 3 days for the Eagles, that's for sure. And you see the slight move up to get Jalen Carter, the patience to wait it out at number 30 for Nolan Smith. So let's start there, and we'll dig into some of the other aspects and certainly the trade of DeAndre Swift. But Carter at 9, Zach, there were some areas that you thought he may go, maybe Seattle, maybe the Raiders, etc. But as that's playing out, how surprised were you? And maybe you weren't because of some of the off the field stuff that he ended up lasting and Eagles getting him at 9.
I thought 5 was the big pressure point. Seattle has had tolerance in the past for players who might have off the field questions. And they're a team that's a contender or that views themselves that way, right? So I thought that if he got past Seattle and Detroit, the Eagles would be in striking distance. And I thought 7 was a spot where they would look to jump. But when Carter slipped, it was clear that the Eagles should go after him. It was the right move to do. From a talent perspective, he's that good a player. I'm not dismissing or even belittling the off-field questions, but that's baked into the price, right? So then once you get past 5, there's no comparable prospect, and it made too much sense for the Eagles. I give Howie Roseman a lot of credit for being aggressive and going after him.
Hey, Zach, let's slide down the board a bit to Nolan Smith because the draft kept unfolding. I'm on a set in Ocean City with Rob. We're doing a draft show, and we're watching 21, 22, 23, 24. And we're all thinking in unison, there's no way Nolan Smith is falling to 30. There's absolutely no. We're still thinking there's a possibility the Eagles are going to trade out of that first round to get more draft capital for the middle round of the draft. So what was your mindset as you start to see it unfold and you still think Nolan Smith is still sitting right there?
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised because I thought he was a strong candidate for number 10. I thought Jalen Carter would be their top choice, but I didn't know if Carter would get past Seattle, like I said. And I thought of the options at 10, Smith made a lot of sense. Fits the Eagles' profile. There's so much there to like. When he was slipping, I was saying, is Howie going to trade up here, right? But then Can you trade up twice in the first round? They already had a limited cupboard of, day 3 picks, right? So you couldn't really necessarily do it that way. They were patient and they let the board come to them. I was very surprised to see him there. I understand he's not everyone's cup of tea, so to speak, in that he's a sub 240-pound pass rusher and didn't have prolific production at Georgia. I would say from the size perspective, didn't we just see what Hassan Reddick did? And then from the production perspective, I hear you there, but that's a conversation about Georgia's defense. You won't be able to find a player under Kirby Smart who has had double-digit sacks. It hasn't happened. It's a different style of defense. So I thought it just made too much sense. And from an athletic perspective, from a traits perspective, I mean, you're talking a 4.38 40, a 41-inch vertical. Those are skill position numbers. You're drafting a wide receiver with that, and you're happy. Drafting an edge rusher with that, man, that's really impressive. So I thought Howie did a good job navigating that round.
Zach, let me swing back to Carter for a minute. I will get to the off the field stuff in a second, but I just want to talk about in terms of ability. In your estimation, does he come in here more NFL ready than Jordan Davis? And if so, how big a role do you see him playing this year in this Eagles defense?
Yes, I think first off, he's more versatile along the line than Jordan Davis was. I think he's a better player than Jordan Davis. And that's not a knock on Jordan Davis. I mean, Jordan Davis, what you're getting is that rare blend of size and athleticism. But if you talk to people in that building, when they were scouting Jordan Davis and they were scouting the Kobe Dean, they kept saying, "Who's this 90? I'm sorry, who's this 88? Who's number 88?"
Right.
Because he's that talented, and from a playing style perspective, he's probably more comparable to Fletcher Cox or Ndamukong Suh, that type of player, than Jordan Davis, who was more of a traditional nose tackle, and you thought the athletic gifts would allow him to be more, and he still can be more. But I'm expecting Jalen Carter to be a day one contributor, and I don't think it's a stretch to think that he's the best defensive tackle on the team by the end of the season. And that's not a knock on Fletcher Cox. That's just saying how good of a player Jalen Carter can be.
All right, Zach, staying with the Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter theme here. You being on the media side like us, and it was brought up a few weeks ago, which we discussed on this show. What is the media going to say when the numbers start adding up weekly that Jalen Carter is playing more snaps percentage-wise than a Jordan Davis? You know how the media is and how we think. So what is that conversation going to be like across the media front?
Well, I hope I can't speak for every reporter. I can speak for this one sitting in this seat here. I wouldn't be surprised. Would be expecting it. Different type of player. Jordan Davis needs to prove that he can be a 3-down player. He needs to prove that he can affect the quarterback. I don't have that same question with Jalen Carter. I expect Jalen Carter to play more. Jalen Carter was drafted higher than Jordan Davis. Jalen Carter he's a different player than Jordan Davis. I think Jordan Davis can be really productive or can in a role, and then you hope that he expands into a bigger role. But I think with Jalen Carter is a top 5 talent. Jalen Carter, I mean, that's the reality. If the Chicago Bears never traded that number 1 pick and the off the field questions weren't present, Jalen Carter might have been the number 1 pick in the draft. That's the type of player you're talking about here. So I would expect Jalen Carter to play more than Jordan Davis.
Off the field stuff, Zach. It went beyond the tragic accident as well. Questions about practice habits and whatnot. And again, reports that it maybe wasn't the most glowing review from some of the Georgia folks. Had you been hearing that kind of stuff, rolling up here, and how does it speak to the culture that they have and the vetting process with Dom DeSandro, et cetera?
Yeah. So look, there are 2 separate things there, right? The legal situation and the tragic fatal accident. And I don't want to diminish or downplay what occurred there. That it was tragic. And that's where, like you said, you trust Dom DeSandro to find out all the information, as much information as you can, and you make an informed decision based on that. The other part of it, whether you're talking about work ethic, desire, coachability, all those buzzwords you hear this time of year. I heard whispers of it, but I'll say, and this isn't to belittle those reports either, but Georgia had no problem putting him out on the field on Saturdays, right? I heard the same thing about Kelee Ringo, right? Georgia had no problem putting him out on the field on Saturdays. And to me, if someone's that much of an issue, the guy behind him is not a better player.
That's a good point.
And I think the Eagles will find the same thing, that your risk tolerance as an organization is often directly proportional to the talent of the player. And the player is extraordinarily talented. And unless they have a better option behind them, which I don't think they will, and I don't think there are going to be many players in this league who are better defensive tackles than Jalen Carter. So obviously you need to make sure that the motivation's there. And, there's an expression that you hear often that money doesn't change people. It just makes them more of what they are. And so you see that going into the NFL. But from a talent perspective, and that's what you're doing in the draft, he's a really good player.
And Zach, I think the Eagles have the perfect combination of veteran leadership in that locker room to groom Jalen Carter, and if need be, to help keep him on the right track. And I'm not trying to demean him or saying that what he did in the past is going to be a problem in the future. But because of the way this roster is structured with veterans, highly decorated veterans, a team that's just coming off a Super Bowl, I think they have the perfect pedigree in that locker room to help him make that transformation from the college life to the pros.
You're right. And, I mean, Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham and Jalen Hurts. I mean, they'll know where Jalen Carter's locker is on day one, right? And that's what you want. You want an infrastructure in place to support, younger. And by the way, it's not just these off the field questions that or these, coachability or things like that. It's anyone who's 21, 22 years old making an adjustment to the NFL. There's a lot that goes into that adjustment. And if you have 10, 11, 12-year guys who've lived it, who've in Brandon Graham's case, has seen it from a lot of ends of the spectrum, that certainly helps.
Hey, Zach, how much of an opportunity in your estimation does Steen have to get that starting role at guard? I mean, is this Juergens to lose, or is this thing very much wide open?
No, I think it's Juergens' spot to lose, and I would be surprised if he does lose it. I think Steen at this point is a valuable reserve, similar to what Jack Driscoll was going into his rookie year. And the Eagles like to think a year ahead with these draft picks. I don't want to speak for Jason Kelce, and I've thought Jason Kelce has played his last year like the past 2 or 3 years. At some point, Jason Kelce is going to play his last year, and Cam Juergens is going to bounce over to center, and they're going to need a starting right guard. And when that happens, it's better to have that guy in the building, having been coached by Jeff Stoutland for a year, than just bringing him in that year. So I think the timeline for Steen is reserved this year, starting right guard next year.
All right, Zach, what did you think about Howie's ability to move back into the middle round and the fourth round? And in back-to-back picks, he basically addresses the secondary with Brown and Ringo, two guys who are sure tacklers and speedy as well. This defense in general is getting a lot faster every year.
I give credit to Howie for the Ringo trade because it's uncharacteristic of him. And I say it's uncharacteristic of him because the Eagles place a premium on future picks. That's a trade that other teams do, and the Eagles like to be the beneficiaries of it. The Eagles like to trade their fourth rounder this year for your third rounder next year. You're getting the pick increase. But it's something the Eagles have done in the past, and Howie has never done it the way he did it this year. I give him credit for doing it because I do think Ringo is the type of player you do it for. I get that there might be questions about, stiffness in the hips or whatever it may be. He's 6'2", 207. Taller corners sometimes have those stiffer hips. But, man, he's 6'2", 207, ran a 4.36 40, started 2 years at Georgia for the back-to-back national champions, had the game-winning interception or the game-clinching interception in the national championship game, and he's 20 years old. To put that in perspective for you, when his rookie contract expires in 4 years, he'll be younger than Hendon Hooker was on draft day this year.
Wow.
I mean, he's going to be a 24-year-old free agent. That doesn't happen very often. So I really like the risk that they took. And by the way, if we're talking about next year's draft, when the Eagles traded that third-round pick, if Keely Ringo went back to school and he's 21 years old, a 3-year starter at Georgia, 6'2", 207, runs a 4.36 40, my guess is he goes higher in that draft, right? So I think it was a good move for the Eagles to make.
Zach, how much do you like Sidney Brown? And I guess I'll sort of ask you the same question along the same lines that I posed with the offensive line. Does he have a shot to crack this lineup? I mean, it would appear if there's a place, it might be safety. So how much of a chance do you think he has?
So Sidney Brown, this is one where you need to, or the organization's trusting their evaluation. This wasn't a consensus pick, and B, they took Sidney Brown higher than all but 2 safeties in this draft. Okay, and so you're saying this guy was the third best safety in the draft, and if you consider Brian Branch a nickel and quite the player that Washington drafted, potentially a corner, you can make the argument that Brown was the first or second safety taken in this draft. And so the Eagles, they call him the Red Star player. It's a guy that they targeted, and you're trusting their evaluation there. I didn't think he would go. I didn't think he was a slam dunk to go when he did, but they really liked the player. To answer your question, yes, I think he can start. I think he will start. I think you take a safety in the third round, the highest drafted safety this organization's had since Jaquan Jarrett in 2011, then you expect him to start. And if he's not starting over Reed Blankenship, or he's not starting over Justin Evans, or let's say Blankenship starting, he's not starting over Terrell Edmonds. I mean, I think you're expecting your third-round pick, top of the third-round safety to start day one.
Zach, when you look up and down the Eagles draft for this year, which pick really surprised you the most that they were able to get?
Well, I mean, I think Jalen Carter surprised me that they were able to get him when they did. I guess the whispers there. And then, like we mentioned, Nolan Smith at 30. I thought Nolan Smith at 10 would have made sense. I thought Ringo where they did. But the pick that surprised me that they made, I'd probably say Tanner McKee. Not to say that your backup quarterback needs to stylistically be the same as your starter. I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I just think the success rate of quarterbacks that late in the draft is obviously low. And there was a big run on quarterbacks this year. So he was the 13th quarterback taken. So there were a lot of teams that took quarterbacks that didn't want him. And so the Eagles are trusting their evaluation that there's something there. It's a 6th round pick. It's a low leverage pick, but that was probably the one that surprised me the most as far as the player, more so than the slot.
Last one, Zach, and I know you got to get out of here. Let's talk about the DeAndre Swift trade. It appears they didn't give a ton up, number one. Number two, if he walks after this year, you get a nice compensatory pick as well. Home run hitting ability, injuries have been a factor, similar to Penny in terms of the injuries, but kind of role and how big a role do you see him playing?
I think he'll be their top running back. I think he should be their top running back. I mean, they did give up a future fourth, and he's someone who was the 35th pick in the draft a few years ago. He's 24 years old. He's been inconsistent, but when he's been when he's had top of the league plays, I'll put it that way, or plays that really jump out at you. I thought it was a real smart move to make. The Eagles have had a lot of success in the past few years targeting players entering the final years of their rookie contracts, whether it was C.J. Gardner-Johnson or Tim Jernigan or Jordan Howard. We can go on down that list. This is the type of move that Howie Roseman has done in the past and was the right move to make. And I would far rather I think DeAndre Swift is more talented than any running back they were going to get in day 3 of the draft. And it's a low cost move. It was the right move to make, and I expect much of him this year.
Zach, we got to let you run, man, but we appreciate you hopping on. We know how busy it is this time of year for you. We do appreciate it. We always love your work, and we love having you on the show, man. Thank you very much. Appreciate
you. Appreciate it.
All right, Zach, take care. That is Zach Berman from The Athletic. Good insights there. Very good insights. That's for sure. I always enjoy talking to Zach. I'm really interested, Gunner, just to pick out one of the guys we were talking about with Nolan Smith. The fact that you already have Reddick in the building, and you went through some of the trials and tribulations, what worked, what didn't work with him last year as far as body set and what he skill set. I think that's a great advantage to hitting the ground running here with Nolan Smith this year.
There's no question about it. And we talk about how defenses are getting smaller and faster. The only negative to that is offensive lines are getting bigger and bigger. So they have the advantage when it comes to the running game. So whereas the Eagles get faster laterally and vertically in terms of what they want to do to be disruptive, they're going to have to give up something in terms of trying to defend the run. And, it worked for them in the past. They weren't the biggest defensive line last year as well, but look at the volume of chaos and disruption they were able to cause because of the type of players they get. Now we see that they're adding their speed to the back end as well. They're adding the speed to the linebacking core as well. They're adding their speed to the D-line as well. That speaks volumes in a pass-happy league that we're in right now in terms, you have to give something to get. And the way we're looking at this Eagles team being constructed in the last few years, they're willing to give up size in a lot of ways on defense to get a lot faster, to be more disruptive in a lot of ways as well.
Yeah. I think that considering how many compensation picks they have next year, compensatory picks they have next year, it allowed Howie to be a little bit more, aggressive and gamble a little bit more with some of the things that you were able to do. So that's, look, to me, it's when you're a good general manager, and Zach mentioned this, you're always looking a step or two ahead. You're concentrating on how trying to build your team right now.
Right.
But you get meaning like, all right, I can move a fourth rounder here in 2024 because I have 2 fourth rounders or I have 3 fourth rounders, and I can do this and I can do that. And hey, if it doesn't work out with DeAndre Swift, if he's hurt the whole year, we still get a 4th rounder back in return. So we're really not losing anything. Like that to me is just smart. And it's seeing 3 steps ahead. And that's, what Howie's done. Derek, I think they've done a really good job of replenishing. Like if you're asking me, I think if Jalen Carter stays right, it's an enormous thing for this team. And you don't lose that much on your defensive line, despite the fact that you lost Javon Hargrave and his 11 sacks. If you're asking me where I'm most worried, it's linebacker. I just don't know about Nakobe Dean and Nicholas Morrow right now. You lost TJ Edwards, who we knew what he is. He's a tackling machine. And Kaiser White's at least been around. We know. These 2 guys, Morrow's played, don't get me wrong, but Nakobe's an unproven. And then you go to the safety spot. But it sounds to me exactly the way Zach was laying it out. He thinks Sidney Brown very much can be that guy and the starter with where he was taken.
Yeah, there's no question about it. People sometimes forget that just because you were not drafted in the first round doesn't mean that you're not a really good football player. And a lot of times teams draft for a specific need, and maybe when you look at Sidney Brown, you thought, how in the world did he drop all the way to the 3rd round? Well, you know what? The teams that needed cornerbacks and safeties took those earlier. And he just happened to be sitting there floating because other teams needed offensive linemen. They needed better edge rushers. They needed to get a little bit better in the linebacking core. It wasn't a need for them in that particular time. And it happens all the time. We sit here and talked about Nakobe Dean all season long. How in the world did he slip to the 3rd round? Despite the stories about his shoulder, was his shoulder right? He was deemed medically cleared, but he still slipped to the 3rd round. It happens every year. This kid could be one of the steals of the draft for him. If he plays the way he did in college, he could be one of the steals of the draft for the Eagles this year.
Yeah, no question. I mean, look, as we sit here right now, and they got to develop them, and they got to get out on the field and perform. There's no doubt. And all we can do is go off of, on paper. But on paper right now, I would put their draft up against anybody else. And you're doing that with a backdrop of having been in the Super Bowl last year. The other teams we might be comparing their draft to, at least a lot of them, we're not playoff teams. We're not very good teams for the most part. We're likely picking high for a reason. That's the difference with this Eagles team.
And he went out. He got 4 players from the premier conference in all of football, college football, the SEC. Got 3 more from the defending champions in Georgia. He's taken 5 Georgia players in the last 2 drafts. You talk about a complete transformation from a guy who we were screaming about. Why do you totally neglect the SEC? To now, over the last 3 drafts, making the SEC type players a prominent part of this team moving forward, and it shows. Look at the talent. Look at the Devontae Smith. Look at the Landon Dickerson. Look at what these guys have given you. Jordan Davis has promise. Nakobe Dean has promise. Now you have 3 more players from a team that was one of the best, if not the best, defensive team in all of college football. They may not be the ideal size that you want for certain players, but they're productive. Nowadays is about production. Production does not come in size. It comes in physical attributes. And as we've seen across the National Football League, production is not a prototypical size at linebacker, edge rusher, D tackle. Plain and simple. The game has changed in terms of how you approach building your team now.
Yep. All right, let's get a timeout. Let's come back. We'll keep it rolling. Amy Fadul from NBC Sports Philadelphia is going to join us. She does the pre and post game show for them, for the Sixers. And we will talk to Amy about the Sixers' unbelievable, surprising, shocking game 1 win last night in Boston without Joel Embiid. Derek Gunn, Rob Ellis. We are Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. Let me tell you about Jim Murray and Principal Financial Group. Because, look, I can tell you from personal experience, I had a tough time finding the right person for my investments, for my hard-earned money, and I found Jim and Principal, and I couldn't be any happier. You will be too. Whether it's retirement planning, 401k review, insurance review, you might have a small business, you're trying to set up your employee benefits. That's another resource that Jim can assist you with. Personally, I've entrusted my IRA, my 401k rollovers with Jim, and it's just been a great experience. And I also use him as a sounding board. I'm not sure about something. Why does this look like this? What does this mean? He's always there to answer your questions. Give him a call, 610-996-4751, 610-996-4751. You can email him as well, Murray, Murray.Jim@principal.com.